Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. Joining us now, once again, is Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, who is a Freeman Fellow with the Fellowship of Reconciliation and a scholar in residence at Stanford University. He's the author of the forthcoming Riot Music, and we are glad to have him with us again today. Reverend Sekou, thanks so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be back on the show, dear brother.
And now let me ask you, I'm especially glad to have you because I have to tell you that, look, I'm not African American, but my heart is breaking right now. I mean, I know that my child, my son, is not going to be shot down by the police. So the grief I feel for Tamir Rice or for Michael Brown or for Eric Gardner can't be anything compared to the grief of course, that their families and friends feel, but that their communities feel. And I guess for one of the few times in my life, I'm at a loss for words, and I don't know where we go from here.
Well, I think at one level, while your son may not face the direct threat of the state, anytime any member of our society is subject to the arbitrary violence of the police, we are all at risk because ultimately democracy is at risk. At one level, democracy has been tear gassed and now it has been placed in a chokehold and it can't breathe, like Eric Gardner said 11 times before his life was ended by a police officer. And so we are in a situation where the soul of the nation is at stake and nothing less of that, and that the nation needs to convert, if you will, not necessarily in the framework of some kind of narrow evangelical right-wing Christian formation, but a nation who has made a such a choice that is able to dig deeper in its own ethical foundation that it might sprout out trees of democracy.
Well, how do we do that? How do we get there from here? I mean, we have what seems to me to be, outpourings of grief from people of, all races and all communities out in the streets of New York City and elsewhere. But it seems that that goes so far and no further, because then we have, Representative Steve King saying, it was just the health problems, for example, of Mr. Garner that caused his death without any recognition of the structural violence that led to those health problems in the first place, or the fact that some of those are endemic in lower income and minority communities, asthma, which I have myself, by the way, but asthma, heart problems, and so on. So I guess the question is, we have an empathy deficit in some corners of our country, and then we have a lot of political leaders who give, and I'll be candid now, in my opinion, nice speeches, very nice speeches, but who don't follow it up with a kind of concrete action that would protect our young people. And I say our young people because we are supposed to be one society. So how do we get there from here, Reverend Sekou? In your opinion, what do we need to do what fire do we need to ignite in the heart, not on the street, that we have yet to ignite?
Well, I think it is what igniting the fire on the streets is what ignites the fire in the heart, meaning that as people, I was at a protest last night, some 8,000 people in the street in Boston shutting down a street by the State House, variety of forces and everyday folks to longtime organizers. And so I think the reality is that as we continue to stay in the streets, people are hardened to go to the streets themselves. Because what happens, social protests and social movements are thermostats. They set the temperature for the political climate, whereas elections and speeches by politicians are thermometers. They just measure political climate, right? And so as we deepen the work of the thermostat of taking setting political climate through social protest to being in a street, and that trickling upward into the halls of government and police forces and to municipalities, up to the federal government, connecting to a global movement, which we've seen protests all over the world in reference to Eric Garner and Mike Brown. And so, and the rebellion, particularly that took place and the ongoing rebellion in Ferguson, 100 and some 18 days, every day we have been on the street. And so in that context, right, that it social movements begin to provide the space, and that protest in itself provides a ritual space where we all might be re-energized, reborn, revived in such a way that we can bring pressure to bear on the powers that be.
Well, we're talking with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou about the response to the killings of young people and African American males around the country, and the fact that I suppose if I want to look for rays of hope, the fact that people are out in the street now, that's something different, right? I mean, with this has been going on for some time, and at least we do see people out in the street. So I suppose I can take some comfort in that.
Well, yes, and I think with people being out in the street, folks like you having these conversations, every sector of society has been mobilized. I mean, we should be heartened, but not necessarily celebratory of the president, but rather the fact that young people forced his hand. He had to meet with them. Right, that the president's meeting with some of those activists on the ground, his hand was forced. That he had met with all the key players in terms of the kind of nonprofit industrial complex, the religious and the civic elites who have typically tended toward supporting the powers. Met with all of them, and they had no answers because they don't control the young people. And so these young people, a new generation of leadership, in a 3 months' time, forced the president of the United States to call them to the White House, which is a significant moment. It is a victory, but it's definitely not the end of the struggle.
Well, but I think I thank you so much for pointing that out, Reverend Sekou, because that's exactly a sign of the fact, and number one, that we do have some power to change things if we're committed, and number two, or begin the process of change, and number two, that we should not expect others to lead, but we should lead for ourselves. Now, I think you're on a cell phone because you were just speaking at a rally. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in a rally last night. I was in Boston, where my church, I served the First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain, and we were we were out by the State House last night, and I was able to be there with the people and share with the people. It was a quite mighty, young, multiracial, queer, radical, everyday action that took place.
So that's wonderful to know. And I guess my question for you would be, and I'm trying to figure out how best to express this, Reverend Sekou, but I guess I'll give you an example. I communicated out through social media. I'm taking the leadership of the young people on the street and so on and others, but I tweeted what I thought was a simple comment and put it on Facebook, which was when Attorney General Eric Holder said he thinks the protesters should isolate the violent among them, which is, a reasonable sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
I said I would hope that the police would start doing the same. And that seemed to me so uncontroversial, but I got a lot of hate back on that. So I guess my question for you is, can we reach the hearts of people like that? I have yet to find a religious tradition that does not say love thy neighbor as thyself in one form or another, that does not say, we should have compassion for innocent young people, or young people who may have transgressed in a minor adolescent type way, losing their lives. Or is there a way to reach those hearts?
Well, I think that happens over time and space. So if you look at the passage of civil rights leadership in the United States, by the time there's never popular support for the passage of the legislation. What happens is that you have a few people who are willing to lay their lives down, bend public will, and shape public policy, and that oftentimes the hearts of the people caught up with the legislation, right? And so while people tend to say, well, you can't legislate morality, you can't legislate people's heart, but you can make it illegal. You can make it illegal to kill an innocent person. You can make it illegal to police and traffic and issue excessive traffic tickets on a community. So we can make those things illegal, and that perhaps the hearts of men and women will catch up. But it's not, and that when you look at the recalcitrant response of particularly the Republican Party and the Tea Party as it relates to, say, voter ID laws in an attempt to turn back the tide on the civil rights legislation, it is clear that men's hearts are tenuous right? When it comes, and I mean men in a
Right. I
very
understand.
gender constructed way, right? That men's hearts are tenuous, and so public policy, public force must also outweigh the tendency of the heart to engage in malice.
Well, and I think I couldn't put it better than that. I think that's the note upon which we will have to leave. But thank you so much for joining us as always, and we hope to speak to you again.
Well, it's a pleasure speaking with you, dear brother. Bless you, and thank you for this work.
Thank you. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. We'll be right back.